Oh, I don't know. Should I just start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Didn't know if there was anything more formal than that. All right. So I was asked to give an overview of brownfields. Can I share screen?
See if you, let me see, you should be able to. Oh, no, here we go. Now you can.
Okay. So I will take us through. It's not very long. Not very many slides. My name is Amber Clark, Neighborhoods and Economic Development Director, and I manage the development incentive boards, one of which is Brownfield. We'll discuss that in a minute. So a definition of a brownfield typically is an urban site for potential development. So it's already been developed and it has a contamination or a suspected contamination. Who's responsible for a brownfield? It really can depend, but only a current property owner is eligible to authorize any decisions to remove, encapsulate, remediate, or manage a site of a brownfield. A site that has been abandoned, that has no ownership in the state of Michigan, you work with Eagle, and there may be funds available to address that site. Eagle is the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. In 1986, the Public Act 381, the state legislators adopted this to allow municipalities to create brownfield redevelopment authorities. These are public bodies of the local municipalities use the ability of tax increment financing as a tool for redevelopment. Municipalities, after establishing that authority, they typically have a plan that details what the eligible expenses are for any project or any property owner. The incentives can be grants or loans and approved through each individual plan. The incentives may include local incentives only or local and state incentives. Once the plan is approved, the property owners are able to conduct the necessary work. And then to be reimbursed, they have to show all eligible costs paid and all activities commenced. Meridian Township established their Brownfield Redevelopment Authority in 2017. It was in response to working through the elevation project with the Ingham County Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. In the past, any other brownfields that had been approved in the township were held with Ingham County because they had their own individual brownfield authority. So the township decided to create their own since they were the ones doing most of the work anyway. And so we split much of the tax increment capture with the county on the elevation project. The elevation project, just a little details about that. It was a junkyard for disabled vehicles and machinery for several years, for decades, and it qualified as a brownfield site. It has plans to remediate the site. Well, has an active plan, but the remediation has commenced, obviously, since it is now the mixed use commercial redevelopment project. Township established the local commission to manage the creation, review, adoption, and reimbursement of all of the plans. The brownfield is eligible township-wide, so as long as the property is in the township and qualifies as a brownfield, they are eligible to come to the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. The BRA will work with a property owner to find resources outside of the township to work with departments like Eagle, Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, as well as the Michigan Department of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And any others. I believe Michigan also has some brownfield. It gets really murky. Generally, working with Eagle is the best bet and the fastest, in my opinion. Since its establishment, the township has authorized 8 brownfields, and that's brownfield plans. I'll be specific, 8 brownfield plans. That's short-term brownfields. That's how we see it. us staff people. And we have approved, so approved and adopted 5 plans to assist the township with redevelopment of sites. We also work with paid Brownfield consultants, so we have consultants review all of the work associated with any plans, the creation, adhering to the plans, adherence to state guidelines, and reimbursement. The reasons why, a brownfield is necessary is that traditional financing institutions don't have an avenue to necessarily cover the cost of the cleanup. This is like, getting your foundation fixed. So getting, anchors put into the bottom of your house. It's one of those sight unseen, but critical and necessary. And without it, you cannot have a house. So I equate brownfield to much of the same thing where it's critical, contamination is present, something needs to be done. And typically it's going to be used in a better way. The best use for land with all of us people here, we hear about the housing crisis. We want to see developed properties become redeveloped, right? We want to keep the green spaces green. So if that is our mission, that means most of the properties that we're going to see turn over already have concrete, already have site, already have been used. And in some of those cases, they've been used in a way that might impact our health if the contamination is allowed to spread or seep, or depending on the type of contamination. And there's a varied many. There are some contaminants that are materials, like within the building itself. And then there's some contaminants that are within the ground based off of the use of the site. Many of those can be, like the big heavy hitters are always laundromats, car washes, and gas stations. So if the site ever had any of those on it and they were in operation, you can bet more than likely it would qualify as a brownfield. And when the developer or property owner is interested in making updates to that property, they can seek out the assistance of the township with that. So sites, because I feel like that's really the question. There are over, I'm fairly certain, 18,000 parcels in Meridian Township. There is no record of all of the parcels having or not having a brownfield, because that is unbelievable. Could a community do so? Sure, a lot of money. In order to know if it is a brownfield and it really qualifies as a brownfield, it has to qualify for phase 2. So there has to be some testing done on the site. And most of the time, and of course not free, most of the time, property owners only want to do that when they know they're going to be making a mass investment into the site. Some people are just curious, but that I've never seen people just digging into the ground just because they want to know. Most people have a suspicion that there could be contaminants based off of the previous use of the site. You have this picture in the background. Obviously, this is a picture of the previous Hazlet Village Square, where there were 2 laundromats, one in operation and one that wasn't in operation long enough, but both of them had put their solvent tanks in the ground. And that is a contamination. Small leak. And we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. So here are the 5 active brownfields that the township has approved. The Hazlet redevelopment, so the Hazlet Village Square redevelopment brownfield was most recently approved. They have not completed all of the work to meet the remediation requirements yet. So they're not past that section, but all of the other brownfields listed have an approved plan, have conducted the work, and have submitted proof for those reimbursements. On the township's website, on the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority webpage, are all of the approved plans. And if any of those plans have amendments, those plans are also on there. So they are publicly available. Plans are approved at the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority and at the Township Board. So 2 boards. And I feel like I know it's kind of crazy, knock on wood, but it is one of the easiest incentives that I work with. It's very straightforward. We work with two really great consulting firms that know their stuff, and these projects are doing really well. It also provides some funding back to the township. So there is a revolving fund that each brownfield plan has to contribute to the township's actual brownfield general fund, which means if the township had property or township decided they wanted to contribute as a partner to a private property based on some need, if it qualifies brownfield related, we'd be able to use that funding for that. So that's also another great reason to have such a strong authority like brownfield. Take a look at our brownfield page, but that's all I got. Brownfield in a nutshell.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I know this group does.
This is Kim, by the way, just out of curiosity, what firms do you work with?
Triterra is our consulting firm, as well as AKT Peerless.
Thank you.
Are there different categories of brownfields, some worse than others, or is it just you're a brownfield or you're not? Yes or no? Or is there kind of a categorization?
Correct. Nope, it's just brownfield or not.
Okay.
Is there a map in the township where all the brownfields are that's accessible to people? Because I go by a property, I'm like, that's got to be a brownfield. Like, is that available?
So no, again, you'd only know if they've done phase 2 is what I think of as, okay, this totally qualifies as brownfield. Phase 1 says that there's contamination. Phase 2 will tell you to what level. I mean, there's contamination everywhere, right? There's road runoff everywhere, right? So there's going to be levels of contamination once they exceed state levels. And if you're going to be redeveloping the site, so you're going to be cracking open the earth, exposing any of that, moving any of that, that's when the state says, okay, hold on. There's a way there's a place you got to put this. There's a way you've got to handle this based off the contaminant itself, right? So there's soil contaminants, there's water contaminants, there's air contaminants. But going back to Mr. Sarver's question, there's not like oh, this is a red level brownfield, this is an orange level, this is a green level. It's kind of like, okay, this site, for instance, using the Hazlitt Marathon, right? It has storage gas tanks underneath the ground. They were replacing those tanks. So if this site ever were to be redeveloped into an apartment building, let's just say, they would probably have to go after another brownfield to clean it up because the use would be different. You're going to have humans sleeping here as opposed to, okay, it's going back to being another gas station. That still qualified for a brownfield because they were still doing some cleanup. They were still moving things that are gross and yucky, and we want to make sure that they did that in the right way. And so they have a reimbursement. It's small, and it's one of the longer plans. We also estimated kind of low on that plan of what we thought the value would be over time. And so we're actually going to pay that plan that back a little faster. Joe's on Jolly, again, that was a junkyard. So different, but same, right? We've got machinery that's just leaking into the ground. It's going to have different contaminants, but they're all going to be measured. There's tons of them. I get this spreadsheet and it's the tiniest little indicators of soil contaminant, water contaminant, and the state through the test will say, okay, that meets or exceeds our requirements for whatever your use is going to be. And this is our suggested remediation. Clean it up, remove it. In the case of the Village of Okemos, we love to talk about, that is a site where there's cleanup and remediation that would happen. But the contamination is so exacerbated, it cannot be completely removed. So there's no way to completely clean it up. So the state's recommendation is to keep it closed, right? So when people say it should be a park, like, as long as you put layers and layers of geotiles and layers of soil and layers of rock on top of that, and then put grass on top of that, then we might consider letting it be a park, but they really don't want it to be used that way. They would prefer the best use, especially on the south block is the block I'm talking about. The best use would be a building because it can have a vapor mitigation system in the building, and it would pull all the nasty vapors out of the soil and pull it away from all of us and keep it away from the river. So there are some that would be, in my mind, a red level contamination or brownfield, but there's no levels. It's just, what was it used for? Does it meet or exceed state levels? And then what is it going to be, right? So what is the developer or property owner proposing? And what is the end value going to be? And then the township local community has to decide, are they willing to give up some of that incentive in the future to help the developer get this project going? And in many of those cases, right, there are sites that are being underutilized and need the turnover.
You identified certain types of facilities that are likely brownfields, but tell me if I've got this right. There's probably possible brownfield sites out there that we maybe are suspicious, maybe we're not. They don't really become we really wouldn't know how many potential brownfield sites in the township, right? Because there's a process to kind of
There's a process to identify it fully as a brownfield and what the contaminations are. However, like the old movie drive-in site, we suspect that would probably qualify for brownfield because people used it to park their car for hours and sit there and let the car idle, right? There's, I think, what is the address? I think it's 2421 Hamilton, used to be a gas station. So if ever someone were to come to us saying, hey, we'd like to completely make over this site. So there is, correct. There's no long list of the 18,000 parcels, 200 that are brownfield. We could, the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority could decide on their own that they wanted to try to do some testing of some sites to qualify them. The sites that we have in the township that have been qualified are on, especially the Hazlet site and the Village of Okemos site are on the state's website. So if you go to Eagle's website, the state of Michigan does have some of the recorded plans of brownfields across the state. And there are a bunch of green dots all over. If you zoom in into the greater Lansing region and come over to Meridian, you'll see a few dots as well. And so those are plans that have been filed with the state to qualify that. But again, if it's been used that way, so any gas station that we have right now, right? That's a brownfield. Any car wash we have right now, that's a brownfield. More than likely, but won't actually be until it has a plan and until someone's going to be doing something. I think Kim has.
Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, I know, like you just said, dry cleaners, gas stations, things like that. What makes a laundromat a brownfield site?
One that's operating with actual solvent tanks in the ground. They put them in the ground and it's nasty chemicals.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was thinking in terms of,
not like the very honest, like I dropped it off, but like an actual dry cleaners operation. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
The history of locations? So like if there was a gas station there, that's recorded with the township, correct? So like parcels that had a gas station, is that known by the township?
Some historical knowledge, yes, but not all.
Okay. And is any of that public knowledge? So say it's a it's private property. Is that public knowledge or is that allowed to be?
No, there's no long list. And I don't think we have as many as you probably think. I mean, sometimes they qualify based off the building material, right? So that might be one. And that's smaller right? That's much smaller because the amount of cleanup you have to do is gonna be much smaller. Much of that can be just taken care of with demolition and then putting it into, you're right, the correct waste disposal based off of parameters. Other times when it's a major redevelopment, like elevation, where it's a junkyard and it's 20 acres of a junkyard, well, yeah, that's a much larger reimbursement. But I don't think we have a plan that reimburses over $5 million. And it's again weighed based off of the total investment of the project itself. And so it's pebbles to the overall investment. These, in some of these cases, like elevation, these are hundreds of millions of dollars.
Amber, this is Sam, and I just kind of want to throw in the hopper here, which may be or may not be correct, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand is that there's a bunch of sites out there that have a history of potentially receiving some kind of contamination, but unless somebody chooses to develop them, they're not registered, or whatever the right term is. They're not officially a brownfield until someone tries to maybe rebuild it as a different use, or maybe even improve what's going on right there. And what I also think I understand is when somebody does that, when they want to rebuild or do something on a property, they typically have to go through a site plan review process, which would potentially trigger this phase one. And that's where they typically need to hire this phase one is where they just hire a consultant to do a background check on previous uses, so they can go to the county, or whatever wherever there's some history of who owned this property in the past. You may not even know that it was a dry cleaning station, or it had some buried tanks, if you didn't do this history. And that's what the phase one is all about. Once you have documentation that there was not any kind of use that contaminates that site, you don't have to do anything else. Your phase one is complete and you've kind of passed the test. But if it looks like you've got some previous use that had contamination, that triggers phase two, where you got to actually spend even more money and go out there and do some sampling, do some digging.
Well, I guess I just to direct, I think the order of operations is a little different. No, there is no long list. Could there be? Sure. You would have to do testing. Phase one does a set of testing. Usually on phase two, you've met a metric of, you found certain contaminants. So now you want to see what level the contaminants are for phase two, right? Again, you're going to test all the soils. You're going to find contamination everywhere. So what is the level? If the level exceeds, now you want to say, okay, well, what am I going to do to clean it up? You don't have to get a brownfield plan. You could just pay to clean it up. You're going to really anyway. This is an incentive the township or county or state uses to help the developer finance that, because typically it's hard for a developer to go to a bank and say, I've got $2.5 million of soil removal and remediation I got to do. I can't ask the soil for that back, like I can't. And yeah, sure, you can try to roll it into the cost of the project, but now you're passing it on to any potential tenants, whether it's commercial or residential, and that might price people out, and it may make actually the project really inconceivable. Plus, they've got to cover that and float that debt, right? They still have to pay for it. That's the thing that the community doesn't understand, is the developer is still paying for it. The township is paying them back after they've paid their taxes, after the value has increased. So it's a little bit of like, we're waiting to see you've fulfilled your promise. Okay, we're going to give you the carrot now. We actually give them the stick first.
And that's the great thing about the Brownfield program, is that it helps developers, once they find out that they have a brownfield, it helps them pay for that remediation process.
Right.
It's all good. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Phase one, and usually again, it's suspect, right? I'm redeveloping there's a sign that says Super Cinema. I mean, Do some work. It is definitely on the developer to do your research. Do the
Right.
research. Check it out. You can look these things up. You can see who the previous owners are, talk to the previous owners. You've done your research, so now you know what the use was, or how old the building was. So you know how old the building was, or when it was built. What materials were they using? Well, in 1970, a lot of asbestos was around. Is it something that you can encapsulate, or is it exposed? And is it going to kill people? Okay, well then let's figure out a plan to clean it up. Yes. Yeah.
Hey, Amber, how does the TIF work for the Brownfield? You know, with the CIA, we established a certain area of the corridor that we were going to pull our TIF resources from. But how does that work for the Brownfield?
So with Brownfield, great question. Ooh, hey, you clever chair. That's my chair, my CIA guys. So smart. With Brownfield, right, like I said, any parcel in the township would qualify. You can use the Brownfield just as the improvements on the land. So if they were to layer this with a different tax incentive, which you can, right? So you can layer Brownfield with DDA tax incentive or CIA tax incentive. And their assessor, she loves me, she then breaks the value apart and does the valuable increase over the land versus the valuable increase over the building. If this was in the CIA, that's how they do it. If the Brownfield is not in one of the other TIF districts and it's just a loan, it's just the single value of the property alone. So it would just be the entire improvement. Sorry, I got technical, but both of these, TIF is, I like to think of it as a backward home improvement loan, So you got equity loans. So you got some equity in the base of your house. You're like, oh man, I got to make an improvement to my house. But, I need a new roof or whatever. To go to the bank. The bank's going to say, well, wow, once you get done with all these fancy things you're going to do, your house is going to be this much. So we're going to give you a loan for this much. Carry on, do your thing, and now the value's all great. And you pay your loan. TIF, tax increment financing, no matter whose authority it is, basically works by taking the base value of the property at the time. So if it's 2025, what is the value of the property at the time? Let's use round numbers, $100,000, that's the value. What is the value going to be when you're done with the project? 2 million. So what is the middle capture? What is the increase, right? 1.9. So that is what is typically would be available to a developer, up to 1.9 million in incentive, because that's how much the property will be as value to the township in the end. So then the developer says, okay, well, I'm going to do this cleanup for $500,000, and I'm going to update the drainage system for another 500. So it comes down to 1 million. So then the township says, okay, we'll reimburse you up to 1 million. So most times the full increase is not the full reimbursement, right? Because they can only be reimbursed what's eligible. And there is a list of, we have some qualifications at the Brownfield of what's eligible. Our consultants review our Brownfield plans. And the specific plan, they review our policy and our bylaws and each individual plan. And they say, okay, well, American House Meridian, you were approved for this much plus interest. So you can have this much. But Joe's on Jolly, you were capped at $300,000. So that's all you can be reimbursed is the $300,000. And so each plan is individual. That's why, I am definitely go check out the Brownfield's website. We have each plan on the website. They're all individual. They all have individual years of how long they'll last, because it's based off each development, what the increase would be and what the cleanup need was for the site. Good question.
Well, Amber, these plans, what's a typical length for the plan? Is it 5 years, 10 years? Is there a typical length for the plans?
I don't quote me. I feel like a good average is like 10 to 15. That
Okay.
seems to be a good average. I feel like the plan is long if it gets over 25, which we have a plan over 25. I'll probably feel like the plan is short if it's under 7, which we have plans under 7. So I'm kind of averaging like 10, 15. Roy has a
Go
question.
ahead, Lori.
Is the township ever the applicant or the recipient of a brownfield,
We have
support?
not yet been an applicant.
But other communities have had?
You, public entities I would say, really the township would want to ask the Brownfield Authority not to have a plan necessarily, but to utilize some of their general fund to address a site. Because a plan typically means that there's an increase. If it's a township property, there is no increase because we're not taxable. So where's the increase coming from? I guess that's the question. That would be any tips. That's any tip question. So that's to the CIA, DDA, any of them are going to say, well, great, sure. We'd love to be able to participate in this project. But as far as a tip plan, how can we approve a plan that has no property increase? Like, where's the income? You're not going to get any income. But if the township were to ask the Brownfield Authority, hey, we need $50,000 to do a site assessment at XYZ place because we want to turn it into a public-private children's, I don't know, whatever, then sure, yeah, maybe the Brownfield would approve that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Kim.
Hi. Yeah, I was just wondering, there probably isn't a parcel big enough in Meridian Township, but have you had any requests on turning any brownfields into like a solar site or anything like that?
No, yeah, and in the township, anything over 10 acres is being gobbled up. And a lot of the things that are over 10 acres were gobbled up in the 90s. So any players that are hitting the screen right now with residential or on greenfield sites for development, they had those for a minute. So there's not very much. There's not very much available. Also, the township, I mean, the township owns property, so that would be one thing to ask them. I wouldn't necessarily think that the brownfield would qualify for solar necessarily, though.
Are there different considerations for something like that? And if you don't know, that's fine.
With brownfield specifically,
Yeah.
so the way that I understand our eligible activities, it has to be a part of an overall improvement for the site. It typically is going to be a part of a income qualifying site, so something that is taxable.
Gotcha.
And we don't call out environmental practices out individually for eligible costs for brownfield. Now there could be some qualifying things but it's not like we say, okay, hey, you're going to put in a solar park in the back, and you're going to do EV charging stations as well. And those all qualify necessarily brownfield. I have to look, but I don't think so. I don't think those amenities do. It's mostly to address the cleanup of the site.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Could you repeat something you just said to make sure I understood it? You said something about solar wouldn't qualify for brownfield, or you said something like that, or did I
Yeah.
reverse it? What do you mean by that?
These are incentives. So I guess if you were going to put in some sort of solar component to like a vapor mitigation system, then maybe sure, because that is a component of keeping the site clean, right? So that's my thing. It's brownfield's not a fund to do rain gardens or to do EV charging stations. It is a fund for site cleanup.
So the brownfield that is the solar park over by Bircham, the roundabout, I think that's East, no? Is that qualified
That's
East
East Lansing,
Lansing?
that solar park's East Lansing.
So Okay, I'm just that one that just okay, so they didn't do any remediation or something to do that. I mean, not that you necessarily know, but for that to have
Don't know. My
qualified
my guess is if it has anything to do with the Brownfield did any site remediation and cleanup, and the solar is a separate portion of the project, right? And
Okay.
I'm not sure if they're charging for the solar, so I don't know if people pay into the solar park.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Because if you do, then that would be where the income comes from, and so that's where there would be increase, right? So I said,
Yeah.
if there's a way to get income, right, on a public owned property, that's one thing, but typically public properties are not taxable,
Okay. Okay, thank you.
right? Yeah. So, yeah.
And in Bircham Park there, they were very careful not to break the ceiling on all the pollution, so that the solar site didn't disturb anything because they were very careful not to, put anything into the ground which would kind of potentially expose pollution.
That's what I was thinking. It was probably a partnership. So they used Brownfield to do some sort of cleanup or encapsulation and probably used funds from another source or worked with a different partner to put the solar there, would be my guess.
Can you tell me why the Okemos site, was it just a laundromat for why it was so bad?
It's also a
What?
gas station, and
Also
the tanks cracked, so that they leaked.
And then they went towards the river.
They went towards the river.
The tanks from the gas or tanks from the laundromat?
I believe both. There's
Oh,
two plumes, which is the state's like worst. It's the worst, right? It's one thing to have the storage tank there, okay, fine, but it's another thing for it to start making its way.
and was that only found that it had cracked when they tried to develop? Or did they already know that?
Correct. Again, the level of contamination was not found until the phase 2
Yeah.
test of the site, which didn't happen until like 2018.
Yeah. I just think about those houses to the south of it and I'm like, ooh,
As long as it's not disturbed, because it is encapsulated, it's okay.
Yeah.
Disturbing it is when we have issue.
mhm.
Amber, are there any state grants to kind of help developers to cover some of the costs? Is
There are state grants with both Eagle and I believe MEDC. They're much smaller, so I believe the grants are like 500,000 or like up to $1 million, and then I think the loans can be up to like 2.5, mostly in both categories. Eagle's a great partner for that. So grants and loans.
And were any of the township projects, were they able to get grants from the state, or weren't they
sorry.
eligible? Were any of the township projects, did they get grants from the state or?
Yes. Okay. So the village site, to remediate it to the point that it is now, right? Again, it will never be completely clean. And if you put a residential building on it, it has to have a vapor mitigation system. But to get it to the point that it is now, the developer had grants with Eagle. And that hole that's at the corner of Hamilton and Ardmore is from the abandoned site. So by the time the developer wanted to start doing some of the remediation, and the township requested that they do the demolition of the buildings, there was no owner of that corner. And the developer hadn't taken ownership yet either. And so the state said, okay, just leave it as it is. We'll take the responsibility of cleaning it up. They left it open with the sheeting and shoring and fence because the developer was going to build, right? And they were going to turn that area into part of a basement. So they figured, why put soil in that would have to be taken out, because the level of contamination on the south block is so extreme that any soil you would put in is contaminated now. So again, it cannot be cleaned. It has to be covered. It should be covered. Until we get that project or some version moving, the Eagles, like, there's really no point. We can put the soil in, but again, it'll have to be taken out if anything's going to be dug up. The Village of Okemos did have the grant and loan. Hazlet Village Square also has doesn't have a state grant, but the state is going to allow them to capture some state dollars. So because we have a local brownfield authority, we can approve the developers for the use of our local taxes. But because Meridian Township is a redevelopment ready community with the state of Michigan, we're also eligible based off of the state through MEDC's parameters to get state approval for a project. And so the Hazlet Village Square does have the ability to capture some of the state dollars as well, which is really great.
Amber, thank you so much for taking the time here. And it's not over, obviously, but it's obviously a wealth of information that you have, and it's complex. There's been a lot of discussion over the last 4 years about parks and restoring watersheds and things like that. And those aren't always on the top of the economic development list of things to do, but they do come up a lot in this area. I'm just wondering, Sam, with your interest and your knowledge also about brownfields, what are some of the other things that we should be talking about as we develop this vision for a greener community, and how do we frame this for other experts that might be speaking with us in the future?
Well, I'll just kind of a sideline to this. Even if you're not a brownfield, and I guess this is all really blurry to me, Amber. You can help me out as I stumble through it, but I've done a lot of work in Detroit where even with trails, and I'm curious about trails here in Meridian, what you've gone through. I haven't worked on any of them here in Meridian, but in Detroit, everything, I mean, it's got arsenic or lead in the soil. So there's contaminants. And when, we work with, it's public money, grants to do these trails. There's requirements to make sure we're not exposing the public to contamination, but it's everywhere. So then we have consultants doing sampling and then they develop a due care plan. It's not like a brownfield, but maybe you can just help, because I don't even really understand what we did to get all this work done. It just happened, but in the end, there was specifications in the project manual that the contractor had to wear gloves or whatever when they were digging around in these areas. So maybe you could elaborate on that.
Well, the due care plan is what the state is going to say, this is how you handle this contaminant, right? And like I said, there's different categories, I would say, really kind of broken up into like your solid contaminants, things that have gone into soils, your liquid contaminants, or your kind of gas contaminants, kind of how they've broken it down. So once you've done your phase 1 and it's got a record showing of, hey, you got some contaminants here, you're like, okay, sure, so does everybody. Then you do your 2. Okay, this is the level. And then you work with consultants and they say, okay, well, this is how you take care of such a thing. This is how you make it as safe as possible. And like I said, not every site's going to be the same. So in Village's case, this is how you make it as safe as possible. It'll never all be cleaned up. In some cases, like Hazlet will actually be able to clean the full contaminants completely. They'll be able to take everything out. No problem. It'll never be an issue again until somebody comes and buys a piece and turns it into a gas station. Or, I'm kidding. That's not gonna happen. I swear, I'm promise. It's 40 years of one site. It'll be 40 years at least of another. But yeah, that's kind of what it is. So the due care is, this is how we take care of it. This is how we're all going to agree statewide legally is the best way to take care of it. Not only just what to do with it, but then how to dispose of it.
But in that regard, so we're doing a due care plan, but it is contaminated, but it's not. My understanding, anyway, is it's not a true brownfield. It's just contaminated property.
Okay. Did they have not You have not exceeded any parts per million above the state levels?
Well, okay, that's where it kind of goes back to John's original question. There's kind of maybe levels. You're either a brownfield or not, but there is levels within brownfields. You're either really contaminated or you're just barely contaminated. But then, is there a threshold that maybe there's contamination there, but you don't really qualify to be a brownfield?
Whenever I see the plans and they have exceeded the parts per million in the state, they list all the contaminants, and then they usually have them in bold. These are the ones that are parts per million above state levels.
Okay, so that's the
They'll
threshold.
call it out. So here's
Yeah.
the full list. I wish I could try to dig it up, maybe and send it to Leroy to give you maybe a copy of what one looks like. If you'd like to see an example, but essentially it's just a big spreadsheet of here's all the contaminants listed, and then there's some in bold. The consultant has identified these are above parts per million at the state level. And then this is how the due care plan is, this is how you take care of it.
Yeah, okay, so I think I'm starting to understand that you can have some contamination, but until you reach that,
The state, yes, the state is
exceeds.
expecting every parcel to have contamination. That
yeah,
is
okay.
fact, right?
Mhm.
But have the levels exceeded their parameters of what they believe is safe for that contaminant? So if it's, I'm not like super sciencey, I'm sorry, but like if it's like a weird nitrogen gas, right, from some solvent,
Yeah,
nitrogen's in the air, obviously there's a level that's safe. What is the level that's safe in this capacity? Maybe if there's nitrogen in the soil, maybe that's a different level, right? So maybe they
Mhm.
have different levels based off of whether it's like a liquid versus a gas, but they do list them out, and then
that's right.
it does say parts per million above state levels that exceeded. Those are
Mhm.
also listed, and then okay, well, this totally qualifies for a brownfield, because if I'm an individual property owner, I would say, okay, well, here's my due care plan, and the state saying, well, you've got to hire a contractor that's this level, and they've got to use this type of materials, and they've got to da 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 da. Now I'm looking, well, holy heck, how do I pay for all of that? So that's where a local brownfield or county or state brownfield authority comes to play, is to help them out. But
Right.
yeah. And the developer doesn't have to go to a brownfield. They can pay for it by themselves, but most people don't. As far as, so I'm trying to piece together what you're looking for, but I think you're looking for ways to possibly use brownfield, the township's brownfield, to test some sites that you would like cleaned.
Well, I think, first of all, we're just looking for the broad knowledge of what we don't. It's kind of a whole mystery of the whole brownfield program.
Okay.
But I think in the end, it would be great if, like what Kim was talking about, if there was a way to utilize the brownfield program to help finance some renewable energy on one of these sites that's just not going anywhere. You know what I'm saying? That to help us.
Is it privately owned? Do you own it?
Well, we don't even know where they are, and that's part of the good. What you've already helped us out with is that there's identified brownfields already that have plans. Now those are, and that's part of the brownfield program, is people already have a plan, so they're kind of looking for brownfield money to make that happen. But where we're, I think, thinking is there other property in the township, and you've already answered this, but that would potentially qualify? We don't know that they do right now, but maybe they potentially would qualify for a brownfield, and that we could look at those for developing a plan to do some solar or some other kind of renewable energy project.
Okay. Well, typically these are private property. So
Yeah.
permission.
Yeah.
And the
And-
township doesn't have a lot of property that we typically like economize in that way. Land pres doesn't allow infrastructure, parks is parks. That's pretty much all that we own as far as township property.
Amber, forgive me if I'm wrong. This, at the end of the day, Brownfield, the Redevelopment Authority stuff, this is an economic incentive program, right? I mean, this is building. I'm not saying I'm opposed to building solar panels, but where's the economic incentive of that? And
That's what I'm saying.
this
It's
is something I have brought up to this group before.
It's
You can
gotta
have
have
all
an
the environmental
increase.
plans in the world, but until you make it economically viable, it's got no traction. That's just the
So,
way our system is.
so okay, so I'm randomly just throwing ideas out here. Okay, this is not a thing. But if 2421 Hamilton was like, we're done, we want to turn this into something else, and you got permission from the property owner, and I don't even know if solar parks are allowed in the township by zoning or ordinance, so let's just say that's all okay, right? Let's just say everything works, pie in the sky. And you wanted to turn that little triangle into a solar park, and you did phase 1 and phase 2, and it said, okay, this is a gas station. We could use the brownfield to remediate the site so that you could put the panels on there, but you'd still have to buy the panels, find the funding for the panels. And yes, there would have to be a property value increase. So that's typically why you don't see the township owning property and then putting a brownfield through, is because you can't tax, we're non-taxable. So without property value tax, there is no increase. Now, when it's layered as a partner with another entity, and maybe they still privately own the land, but the township's gonna put a building on it, or we're gonna be a leased tenant or something like that, that's different. That's how communities make it work through the public-private. Okay, sorry. Kim's got a question. I think.
Yeah, when I was asking earlier about solar panels, I wasn't really thinking so much in terms of the township, but I was thinking more like in Lansing, the old GM sites on West Saginaw
Yeah,
that
perfect. Yeah,
are horribly contaminated when you
Yeah.
can't,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
limited even in what you can remediate and cap.
sure. That's
Um,
perfect. That's perfect. GM should partner with Lansing's Brownfield and say, hey, we're gonna turn part of this into a solar park. We're gonna charge back to the customers, or we're gonna pay into DTE or consumers or whatever, right? So there's an increase.
Yeah,
And Lansing's Brownfield helps them cover the cost over time of that cleanup. But GM still has to come up front with the money. So GM still
right.
do the cleanup, right? They still gotta find the capital from somewhere.
Yeah, and the reason I mention that is because I retired from FedEx, and Adams Plating, which is I think they were on Verlinden, EPA level site contamination. When that place burned, the EPA came in, and they were sending samples of things back and forth through FedEx to get for testing and this, that, and the other. And I talked to the guys there a little bit, and just so how long are you guys going to be here? And their answer basically was forever,
Yeah.
because there's some sites that you can't clean. All you can do is contain it.
Commissioner Plating and Jackson's the same.
So for those kinds of sites, I was thinking, if all you can do is, cap it and seal it or whatever, something like that might be suitable for a solar field.
Yep.
Which, we don't have that kind of space here in or in Meridian Township.
Got it. Okay.
So I'm wondering, in terms of development in the township and a development approval, does the township, when they're going through the approval process, and you're on a piece of property that was not previously a brownfield, is the development approval process going to not necessarily give approval for something that will, by the time that property is done, say laundromat, gas, not necessarily approve something for a location that then will turn it into a brownfield?
No, no, I hear what you're saying. No, we don't do that. It's not allowed. Because because our code of ordinances, we cannot restrict,
Okay,
we shouldn't restrict by industry like that. I
Okay.
end up in some lawsuits, plus our code of ordinances, right? Each zoning has use by right. And a gas station, isn't a use by right. I think it's an SUP, right, Brian? But that's not something the township would just be like, no, we're not gonna ever have gas stations. Like, that's more of a planning question-ish. But I hear what you're saying, like, oh, this could eventually turn into a brownfield, would we have it? Brian, what do you think? How do I answer this? No,
I,
yes.
yeah, you can't write an ordinance that says you can't have, there are certain, like, the one that comes to mind, like, you can say we're not going to have marijuana, but we can't write an ordinance that says we're not going to have any gas stations. I am looking frantically.
I think
I think you're basically right. There's always a process.
But no, we would not say,
you
no,
can't limit
you
it.
cannot have a laundromat. Like, so I think a
I,
car wash is a special use.
oh
permit.
yeah,
They'd have to come through the process.
Yeah.
But if they go through the process and they do the things, I think the planning law is, hey, you go through the process, you meet the requirements, we're supposed to say yes, because, and they go through the special use permit process, the board says yes to this gas station. That's why they go through the special use. I don't know, is a laundromat and a car wash special use, Brian?
typically, yeah. I'm looking right now. I'm getting kind of called out with 3 minutes to go, so
Sorry.
I'd have to put
Sorry.
more specific. Um, depending on where it is. But geez, I don't even see. I think, let's see, you get to the C3 district and you get into
Use by right.
um well, anything with a drive-in is going to be a special use permit per se, just on the face of it. And then laundromats. It's an
So
interesting
while you're
question.
looking at that, is there a limit, like say you're trying to put a gas station next to a wetland, is there any restriction with that?
40-foot wetland buffer or 20-foot, depending on the size of the wetland.
Okay,
You're not going to put it right next to the wetland. If the wetland is big enough to qualify, there is a minimum size that wetland has to be.
Mhm.
I want to thank everyone for coming today. I hate to cut people off. I just want to remind people that if you've got a topic you'd like to suggest for a future dialogue or a speaker, please pipe up and we'll schedule it in. Amber, thank you so much. And Sam and Sarah, John, Ryan, Bruce, everyone for very great questions. Kim, any parting comments for the road? Amber, you can have the last say if you like.
I really appreciated Amber today. She's a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Amber.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say to the group is that has been so informative. We were thinking of another person to talk to for Brownfield, so maybe next week we discuss whether we even want to go to that level.
Right.
We'll see, but we can keep that for another time to see if there's even other questions to ask. So a different, like state, I can't remember if it was state level or whatever, but this has been so helpful, so maybe we don't. So that's what I was just thinking, is maybe for next week we review what we were discussing previously and see if we even need that. So Amber, you can close out if you have something to say.
Just email me if you have any questions. Take a look at the Brownfield page, yeah, it's a public body. So the minutes and stuff, they're posted if you want to see what we talked about or how they've gotten to where they are, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amber.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Amber.
Bye.
Bye,
See you later.
Thank you, Sam.
Bye-bye.